Hey, what's going on, everyone? Greg here, and I got a surprise for you today. And oh, it's kind of slightly in frame already. It's the Mac Studio. You read the title, you know what this video is about, and you know that I have probably been waiting for this computer for a very long time, or something like this computer, because I really feel like Apple hasn't made a mid-size kind of pro desktop in a very long time, and I think I can kind of almost trace this back to the days of the G4 Cube, where you had the big Pro desktop and then this smaller option to go along with it. We're not counting the trash can Mac Pro. That was a complete replacement for the Mac Pro at the time. So it is kind of weird to live in a world where we now have a mid-sized desktop from Apple again, one that promises some pretty competent power, and one that is available without a 27-inch iMac with it. Like, Apple got rid of the iMac and brought along a mid-sized desktop. I never thought I would see them do that, but for this video, I really wanted to check out the base model of the Mac Studio for you, because at $2,000 with that M1 Max chip with 32 gigabytes of memory, a 512 gigabyte solid state drive, and a lot of ports and all that good stuff, I really feel like this $2,000 desktop going into this video, I really feel like this is going to be the one that most people should buy. That's going to deliver the best value for your money. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and check out the Mac Studio. Let's see how it performs with benchmarks. And also, I do want to give you some of my first impressions with this device. All right, and we unboxed it, obviously. Didn't do any sort of editing magic with that. Absolutely not. I would never deceive you like that. But anyway, we have to do some benchmarks now because you know, at the end of the day, this is just a computer. It's just kind of like a square, you know? There's no screen on it. I can't really interact with it too much. So the thing we got to plug it into is the Studio Display, which I also got. I have a lot of thoughts on the Studio Display. Maybe I'll talk about it a little bit towards the end of the video, but I think I'm actually going to do a dedicated video on the Studio Display and also unboxing that, so make sure you subscribe to the channel, check that out. But for now, let's focus on some of these benchmarks. So obviously the first thing I love to load up on a new Mac is Geekbench. Geekbench obviously is a cross-platform benchmark, so we can kind of get a good idea on how the CPU inside of this is going to perform just looking at the numbers. Obviously, benchmarks for all these are just benchmarks, so they might not be indicative of real-world performance, but I always think they usually give you a pretty good indication of how this will perform against other machines. So running Geekbench on our new Mac Studio with the base model M1 Max chip, you can see we are getting a single-core score of 1,785 and a multi-core score of 12,635. And no big shockers there, right? This is the same M1 Max chip that you can get inside of the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro. And hey, it has the same 10-core CPU. So there's really nothing shocking here. The only difference between this Mac Studio and maybe some of the other M1 Max configurations you can get is that this is the base model. So it does have a binned chip, but it doesn't lose out on CPU power, it loses out on GPU power. But before we go on to the GPU, let's test out another CPU benchmark, which would be Cinebench. Now, Cinebench is a little bit more intensive than Geekbench. Now, while I probably expect around the same score as what we would get on a MacBook Pro, the thing here is that Cinebench takes a longer time to complete. It runs for about 10 minutes, and it's kind of stressing that CPU the whole time. So this might actually be a good test to see if there is any thermal improvements with this cooling system on a full-size desktop, and if that actually gives any benefits to the M1 Max chip inside of a desktop machine, or if there's any sort of throttling going on. And as we run Cinebench, you can see that we finish with a score of 12,344. And if you're hoping for a big performance increase in CPU power over the MacBook Pro because of better thermals, you're not gonna find it here, because the MacBook Pro basically got the same score at 12,354. But I think that's just kind of a testament to Apple Silicon. The fact that we can put the M1 Max chip inside of a thinner MacBook Pro, and then also put it inside of a relatively small desktop still, but still a mid-size machine and kind of see that they perform the same. So thermal issues on this are probably going to be non-existent for the Max chip at least. And honestly, while running that Cinebench benchmark, ramping up that CPU, I did not hear the fan spin up on this one. So that is obviously a good sign. We are long past the days of Intel Max where you would load up that application and it would just sound like a jet engine screaming across your table or desk, whatever you use for your Mac. All right, next I just wanted to do a quick GPU benchmark, this time using GFX Bench. Going to do the Aztec Ruins on-screen and off-screen, and as you can see as we run through this benchmark, on the on-screen, you are getting 3,483 frames or 54 frames per second, and then if you run that test off-screen, you're getting 15,548 frames or an average of 241 frames per second, and this seems kind of accurate, especially for the bin chip that is in the model on the base model Mac Studio, which is a 24-core GPU. Obviously, if you spend a little bit more money, I think it's like a $200 add-on, you can get the chip that has no issues with it, basically, and that would give you a 32-core GPU. And finally, I just wanted to do a disk speed test because one of the things that I found out when I was reviewing my MacBook Pro is that if you got the lower configuration SSDs on these machines, they were actually slower than that advertised, I think it was like 7 gigabytes per second on the read and write speed for the 4 terabyte and 8 terabyte drive. So this is a 512 gigabyte drive. It's the base model, and running the disk speed test, we can see that it's basically the same as the MacBook Pro. If you're getting one of these lower storage Mac Studios below 4 terabytes, it is going to be at a slower speed. So they're still really fast SSDs, right? They're not giving you that full 7 gigabits on the read and write, but you are getting 5,440 on the read and 4,600 around there in the write speed. So these are still really fast SSDs, but if you want the fastest SSD or you just want more storage, honestly, you're gonna have to spend a pretty penny to upgrade to the 4 or 8 terabyte model. All right, and finally, I'm a video editor, so I wanna just see what the export times are on this Mac Studio. So for the first test, I loaded up just a very simple 10-minute clip with just some light color grading kind of stuff, no other graphics or any layers or anything special like that. Just kind of wanna give you a very simple test. That's 10 minutes of 4K footage, and we're exporting that to H.264 with background rendering turned off, and the Mac Studio with the base model M1 Max chip completed that in 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Next, I did the same test, this time using ProRes, and that finished even faster at 1 minute and 3 seconds. And this is basically, again, very similar to what I saw on my M1 Max model of the MacBook Pro. The M1 Max chip has a dedicated video encoder for this type of footage, especially for ProRes. It really just burns through that and exports it super, super fast. So, you know, we're seeing the same things, but I think that's a good thing because what we're seeing here is just, honestly, I think a pretty good value at first glance. Again, this is the base model. And how I would compare this right now on the market is if you were looking at, say, an entry-level 14-inch MacBook Pro. Well, if you're getting that model for $2,000, you're getting a weaker binned M1 Pro chip, which is weaker in CPU and GPU because it only has that 8-core CPU. And then if you want it to get an equivalent spec for that MacBook Pro, you're spending an extra $800 to bump up the memory, which starts at 16 gigabytes, bumping that up to 32, and then to get that same M1 Max chip. So with this Mac Studio, listen, it's expensive, right? $2,000, I'm not saying that's not expensive, but if you already have a display and you're not spending a lot of money on like the studio display, if you're just looking at it from a value perspective, if you can already hook this up to something, well, you're getting more performance out of something like the base model MacBook Pro, and in a way you're saving money because you don't have to spend the extra $800 to upgrade to the same components as the MacBook Pro. So Overall, my first impressions of the Mac Studio are super positive. Obviously, this isn't the most powerful model with the M1 Ultra chip. I am getting a M1 Ultra Mac Studio later. But first impressions of this Mac Studio, overall, I knew what to kind of expect with the M1 Max chip with the performance, and I'm satisfied with that here. But just about the device itself, what can you really say about a desktop computer? There's nothing to interact with here, right? Well, in a way, there kind of is, because one of the things, even with my short time using this Mac Studio, I really like some of the design elements that Apple implemented here. I like having the ports on the front. Having access to two USB-C ports is super helpful. When I was setting up the computer, I was very easily able to plug in my keyboard and my trackpad, get that hooked up very simply. And then the SD card slot, not having it on the back of the machine like I used to have with some of my desktop iMacs, just makes interacting with that, putting it in, taking it out for footage, very simple, very easy. I can see why people like having ports in the front instead of all the way on the back. But hey, if you flip this thing over on the back, you are greeted with a really, really nice selection of ports too. So 4 Thunderbolt ports, which is great. That's the most ever on any Apple Silicon Mac yet. You get 10 gigabit Ethernet included on every model, which is just going to make sure that you get like super fast internet if you can take advantage of it, or probably for most people attaching it to something like a NAS for storage. You also get 2 USB-A ports. Crazy, right? Apple's releasing a brand new computer design in 2022, and they didn't ditch USB-A because I guess they found that important on a pro desktop machine. Then of course you have HDMI, very great for hooking up to TVs or an existing HDMI monitor. And then the headphone jack, which is supposed to be like a high impedance headphone jack, whatever. So is the base model Mac Studio worth it? Well, so far, at least with my short time with it, I think it is. Also briefly, because I did mention it in the beginning, obviously I'm using this along with the Studio Display, going to do a dedicated video on that as well. But I just will say in this quick little segment here, I really like the 5K Studio Display. I know people are upset about the $1,600 price point, and I saw like people recommending that maybe you go ahead and get an LG Ultrafine 5K monitor instead. I'm gonna say those people are dead wrong. Dead wrong. Do not listen to those people. This is why you come to Greg's Gadgets, to get the better reviews out there, because even though the LG Ultrafine 5K might deliver the similar or even the same picture quality, it is just losing out in some things. Like, the speakers inside of this Studio Display are amazing. They sound noticeably better than what is in the LG Ultrafine 5K. Put that on the desk, get rid of your external speakers, let that thing surround you. It is impressive how good the speakers sound for inbuilt monitor speakers. And just the display looks super nice, very great design on it. And you could tell, like, with my initial impressions of the display, I've just been waiting for Apple to make a display for so long. But I'll cover that more in a fully dedicated video. So if you want to see that video and it's up, it's probably up here right now. And yeah, that's going to do it for this video. If you liked it, make sure you give me a like. If you want to see more, make sure you're subscribed. If you want to see even more tests and a full review on this Mac Studio, again, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone. Oh my God, the Mac Studio is finally here. I have been waiting for this thing for so long. I don't even want to work on a YouTube video. I'm just shooting this on my iPhone because I want it raw. I want my initial impressions here, in the raw. So excited. Oh my God, look at this thing. How do you even open this? The engineering on this box is immaculate. Oh, look at that. It's the Mac Studio. Oh yeah, that's a big Mac.